If you're watching this because you know your relationship is destroying you, but you still can't bring yourself to leave, then I really want you to stay with me. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, like everyone does, just leave. You probably hear that enough. I'm guessing you probably hear it from all your friends. Why are you still with them? You know they're never ever going to change. That's what you'll hear. If it was really that bad, you just leave, they say. And every time somebody says it, you probably think to yourself the exact same thing. You just don't understand. You don't understand, for example, my finances. You don't understand my children. You don't understand my home that I live in. You don't understand how long we've been together. I don't know anything else. You don't understand that I still actually do love the person. And you definitely don't understand what happens inside my head every time I actually think, this is it, I'm going to leave. So today, I don't want to talk to you about why you should leave. I want to talk to you about why you feel like you can't. Because those are two completely different things, and I'm sure you're aware. There's something I want you to understand, and that's before we go any further in this video. Struggling to leave a relationship that is hurting you doesn't necessarily mean you don't recognize what's happening. Okay? Sometimes you understand exactly what is happening to you. You just can't see a life on the other side of it just yet. And by the end of this video, I want to help you start to see it. Because leaving doesn't always begin with just packing a suitcase and going. Sometimes leaving begins months and months earlier. It can begin quietly in the background with one tiny little decision. Then, once you've made that, another decision. And then another one. Until one day, you realize that something has changed. Because you're no longer asking, how do I survive this relationship? No, instead, you're asking yourself, how do I build a life without it? And that's where I want to help you get to. So let's start with something that I think people outside these relationships often completely misunderstand. And that is when it's the whole just leave. It sounds incredibly simple when you aren't the person who has to do it. Like, realistically, imagine you've been with someone for 20 years. Let's say you might be 40, 50 years old. You've got children together, maybe even grandchildren. You've got pets, and maybe the house it's in their name, the home you live. Maybe most of the money comes through them. Maybe you've spent years raising the children while they've built their career, so they're in a different position to you. Your friends have slowly disappeared. Your confidence isn't what it used to be 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And perhaps the person you would normally turn to when life falls apart is the same person you're now considering leaving. And then somebody comes to you, or you go and have a coffee and they say, yeah, just leave. Okay. So let's say I leave. Where? And go where? With what money? What do I tell the children when I leave? Do I take the pets? How am I going to start paying the rent? Start a career doing what at my age? And then there's the question that nobody really wants to admit. What if I leave and I've made a terrible mistake? Because what if the person I leave changes? What if somebody else gets the version of them that I've spent 15 years begging them to become? And then what if once I've left, I'm lonely? What if nobody ever loves me again? What if all of this was because I'm the problem? And that last question is incredibly important, because after years of being told that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult, too demanding, too insecure, or impossible to please, eventually something can actually start to happen, because you will eventually stop asking, why are they treating me like this? And instead of asking that, you'll start asking, what is wrong with me? And you'll believe it. That's when these relationships become incredibly difficult to understand from the outside. Because the person who is being hurt can end up working harder to fix the relationship than the person that's hurting them. And I know that you know that's true. Think about how much time you've spent analysing the person. You know, you'll think, why did I say that? Why did they suddenly become cold? Why were they wonderful yesterday and then cruel today? You'll think things like, why can they treat everybody else so nicely? Why aren't I enough? Do they actually love me? And here's the question that you'll think, are they really actually a narcissist? Was their childhood responsible for this? Are they traumatized? Are they traumatized? Could therapy change them? And maybe if I communicate differently, just maybe if I change and stop reacting, maybe if I give them a little bit more affection, or maybe if I'm less affectionate, or give them a little bit of space, maybe if I stop asking them questions and questioning all the bad behavior they have, maybe if I become the person they seem to want me to be, and before you realize it, what's happened? Your entire emotional world revolves around them and understanding them. This is what you're living. But here's the question that I really want you to consider. While you've spent all this time, years potentially, trying to understand them, who's been trying to understand you? Let me know in the comments, because I really would want to know the answer to that. Because that question matters. Because there comes a point where understanding why somebody hurt you doesn't make being hurt by them any easier. Yes, maybe they had a terrible childhood. Okay, and that's not good. Maybe they have experienced trauma, and that's awful. It really is. And yeah, they may be a narcissist. Maybe they're deeply insecure. Maybe there are 100 reasons why they behave the way they do. But understanding someone's wounds doesn't mean you have to spend the rest of your life being wounded by them yourself. And this is where I want to start changing all the questions for you. So instead of you thinking, why do they do this? Why do they do this to me? Ask, what is this doing to me? Because that's what's important. Instead of saying, do they, does he, does she, do they love me? Ask, do I feel loved right now? Instead of thinking, I'm with them, can they change? are they going to change? Ask, how long am I prepared to live like this if they don't change? And instead of, why can't I leave, which I know is crossing your mind, especially if you're watching this, ask, what would I need in order to feel capable of leaving, and then make a checklist. The last question changes absolutely everything, because why can't I leave can make you feel powerless. But what would I need gives you something that you can actually start to work on. Now, maybe for some people, the answer is simple. It might just be money. Maybe it isn't money and it's somewhere to live. Maybe it's the fact that you need to rebuild your confidence. Maybe it's just simply understanding your legal position in the relationship. Maybe it's reconnected with family and friends that you've been cut off from, so you feel alone. Or getting professional support. Maybe it's working out what's going to happen to the children. Maybe it's finding out what's going to happen to the pets. But trust me, they're all going to be okay. Maybe it's simply having one person in your life who knows what is really happening, and not that person that just says, just leave. Now, if that person does, send them this video. And suddenly the impossible things becomes a collection of much smaller problems. Problems that can have a solution. Now, I want to talk about something else that keeps many people, I've spoken to thousands of people, and it keeps many people stuck. And that is something called hope. It's such a beautiful word. And normally it is. But hope can also keep somebody in a painful relationship for years and years, because you're not always staying for the person that's standing in front of you today. Sometimes you're staying for the person they were in the beginning when they love bombed you. That version of them, the person who just couldn't get enough of you at the time. They were obsessed. The one who would do anything for you, who messaged you constantly, who made you feel chosen. You felt like the chosen one, who made plans for your future, planned dates, who seemed to understand you in a way that nobody else ever had. And every now and then, and I know this to be true, that person does come back and you see a little glimpse of them. Maybe after a terrible argument, they're suddenly loving again. Okay? Maybe they apologize. Of course they do. They might cry. Maybe they even make promises. They've finally understood what's going on. Maybe you have an amazing weekend together. Maybe you have a weekend away and it's different because you're on holiday. And at that time, you'll be thinking, there you are. That's the person I fell in love with. And suddenly, there it is again. Hope. But then, inevitably, like always, it starts to happen again. It happens again and again and again. And eventually, you can find yourself living for those little moments where the relationship becomes good or good enough to make you believe it could permanently become that way at some point in the future. That's hope. That's part of what makes these dynamics so confusing. If somebody treats you terribly every second of every day, leaving, trust me, it might actually be easier. It's the good moments that actually complicate everything. It's the birthdays where they might be wonderful, or the holidays where you laugh and actually get on together, or that night where things just seem to go right, the morning where they make you coffee, the apology that they give you that actually might sound a little bit genuine. Those moments aren't necessarily imaginary. because you are actually experiencing them. That's exactly why this hurts so much, because you aren't grieving a relationship that was entirely terrible. You're often grieving the possibility of what you thought it could become on a permanent basis. And I think that's something people need permission to just acknowledge, okay? Because you can miss somebody and still know that they're unhealthy for you. You can love somebody and still recognize that the relationship is destroying you, especially with narcissists. You can remember beautiful moments without using those moments to erase everything else. Now, two things can be true at the exact same time. And I think accepting that can be incredibly freeing. Now, let's talk about the ugly thing, money. Because I don't think we talk about this enough. For some people watching this, the biggest thing keeping you, it isn't love. It's financial reality. And I want to be very careful here, because every relationship and every financial situation is obviously different. But perhaps you spent years building what you thought was shared security in the relationship, because potentially your partner is the one that has the career. So that person has been working, they've been building their career, they've got their salary, which has grown over time. They've got their pension. Maybe you've worked too, but your career took the hit when children came along. Or perhaps, which I've spoken to so many people, perhaps you stopped working altogether. And throughout the marriage, obviously you weren't thinking that's their money, because it wasn't. You were thinking, this is our life. Then suddenly you're contemplating leaving, and then you're realizing something that's terrifying. You don't know whether you could afford your life without them. And if you're, let's say you're 45, 50, 55 or 60, starting again can feel completely different from someone that's starting again at 25. And that fear is real. But financial uncertainty doesn't mean that you don't have options. It means one of your first jobs is understanding what your options actually are. Because obviously you can't just guess this. You need to understand this. You need to understand what money exists, what you would be entitled to, what is yours, what are your rights where you live in your home. Also, what could you realistically earn if you were to want to go back to work? What support might be available for you? Who could give you qualified financial or legal advice? What would living independently actually cost you? Now, you don't need to answer all of these questions today, so please don't feel overwhelmed. But having information reduces fear. And let me tell you one thing I've learned is that fear thrives in insecurity. So let's move on to something else. If you don't have children, skip this part, but let's talk about the children, because this is where so many people become completely stuck. And I can imagine why. Because you'll tell yourself, I can't break up the family. I can understand that. I can't do this to my children. They need both their parents. I want both their parents to be together. And I completely understand why a parent might think like this. It's completely natural. But I want you to ask yourself something, and ask it gently. What are your children learning about relationships by watching yours? What are your sons or daughters, what are they learning about love? What are they learning about respect in relationships? Are they learning from you what healthy boundaries are? What are they learning about how a husband speaks to a wife, or the other way around. You know, how a wife speaks to a husband. Children don't only learn from what we tell them. They learn from what we normalize around them. That doesn't mean separation is automatically the answer. It means staying for the children deserves deeper thought than simply assuming staying is always less painful for them. And then, okay, let's quickly go on to the pets, because people sometimes laugh when somebody says, I can't leave, because of my dog. Okay, but I don't laugh because I've heard it before. For somebody who's been isolated or emotionally worn down, that animal may be one of the most consistent sources of affection that they've had for years. And that's not funny at all. It matters, and in reality, everything matters. Your home matters. Your children matters. This is a life you have built. And if that's a pet, then your pet matters. Understanding your finances matters, because money is going to be important. Memories matter as well, and sentimental things. You're not ridiculous for considering all of them. This is your life that you've built. But there is something else. There is one thing that also matters, and it matters more than any of it. And that is you. And I wonder how long it's been since you were included in that list. Because this is another pattern that I see again and again and again when I speak to people. Because you become responsible for everybody else. I see many of these people that are worried. They're worried about leaving because they're so worried about their partner, their children, they're worried about what their friends will think, their parents, their house, and their responsibilities and their debts that they've built. And I understand. That's very important. It's important to worry. If you're separate, who's going to be taking people to these appointments? Who's going to be remembering about this? We've got this holiday booked in the future. Who's going to be going there? Who's going to be remembering to do this? What is everyone going to think? What are the neighbors going to think when we separate? Everybody's emotions, everybody's problems, everybody's happiness. However, then somebody needs to ask, what do you need? I want you to write that down. And you don't even, I bet if someone asked you that now, you might not even know how to answer. So I am asking you, what is it? What is it you need? Not what does your partner need from you, or what do you need to do to make it better? What do you need? Selflessly, what do you need? What would make you feel safe? What would make you feel respected? What would make you feel peaceful? What would calm your nervous system? What would make you wake up without that feeling in your stomach where you're fantasizing other situations? What would your life look like if you weren't constantly trying to prevent somebody else's next reaction? So when you get a moment, actually start to imagine that. Okay? So I want you to imagine that you wake up. Nobody is giving you the silent treatment. Nobody is checking what you're doing and where you've been. Nobody is making you explain your tone because you've asked someone to do something 10 times. Nobody's making you question whether you're remembering something correctly because they've gaslit you so many times. Nobody is waiting to turn an innocent comment into a circling argument that leaves you apologizing. You make a decision without wondering whether somebody will punish you for doing it. You go see a friend without worrying about the consequences of, you've gone to see them. Or you go out and buy something, even something small, new shampoo, without having to justify it to them. You sit in your own home and your body isn't waiting for the atmosphere to change. For some people watching this, that probably sounds incredible. And for others, strangely, it might actually sound frightening. Because the thing is, for many people that have been in it for a long time, chaos can become very familiar. And familiar can feel safer than the unknown. Even when familiar is actually something that is hurting you. That's something I really want you to understand from this video. Something you're not frightened. You've got to be not frightened of leaving because the relationship is just okay. Some people, they're frightened because you know that this is your life. You know how to survive this because you've been doing it so long. The unknown is the part you haven't yet learned. And that is why rebuilding yourself, it matters so much. Don't wait until you've left to start remembering who you are. So right now, from today, start now. Think about who you were before this relationship consumed you so much. Ask yourself these questions because this is important. What did you used to enjoy? Who did you speak to? Who made you happy? Who made you laugh? What did you want from life? What was your goals? What dreams have you quietly now put away? What parts of your personality became too much for somebody else that you just stopped? Maybe you used to be a super confident person. Maybe you were a spontaneous person that liked to do stuff, I'll go do this. Maybe you love dressing up or dressing in a certain way. Maybe you love traveling, or you danced, or you met frequently with a friend group. You're probably the sort of person that had friends everywhere, or a small knit of friends, and you like to meet with them, but now you don't really get to see them anymore. Maybe you were a loud person. Silly, loud. Everyone thought you were funny. But now you're the quiet one. Maybe you were incredibly independent. You're the person that could take on anything. Let me ask you, where did that person go? Because I don't necessarily think that they're gone. I think sometimes they're buried underneath years and years of survival. And this is where I want this video to become something that is practical. If you know something has to change, don't make your first goal, I have to leave my entire life tomorrow, okay? Because that's super overwhelming. Make your first goal, I need to create options for myself. And that's much less overwhelming. It's different. Start by reconnecting with safe people. Okay? It's really easy. Speak to somebody that you trust. Then understand your final, understand what you're going to do. Understand your financial situation. If you have to, get someone that's qualified and get the facts in front of you. If you believe your partner could become threatening, controlling, or dangerous if they knew you were considering leaving, please don't assume that confronting them is the safest thing to do. If you think that might happen, get specialist domestic abuse support and create a safety plan that's appropriate to your circumstances, because your safety comes before proving any point or any of this. And then start rebuilding your ability to make decisions. And these can be small, tiny little decisions that you've not made for a very long time. They can be as simple as, what do I want to eat today? Or where do I want to go? I can go anywhere. Or who do I want to speak to? I can just pick up the phone, or I can go see someone. What do I think about this? It sounds almost ridiculously simple, but if you've spent years having your judgment questioned, choosing things for yourself, again, really, really matters towards your healing. And I want you to notice something, okay? We started this video with the simple question of, Why can't I leave? But I don't think that's the question anymore. At least I hope it's not. The question that I hope you're sort of questioning yourself is, what would I need to build a life where staying isn't my only option? Now that might take time. Leaving maybe isn't the option, but having options is the most important thing. You don't have to have your entire future mapped out right now, today. You don't need to know where you'll be living 5 years from now. You don't need to know whether you'll meet somebody else, the future love of your life. You don't need to know whether you'll get married again. That's not something you need to know right now. You don't even need to decide everything in the next week. You just need to start becoming curious about the possibility that your life could look different. And please don't underestimate how significant that is, because there was probably a time when you couldn't even admit to yourself that something was wrong in your relationship, and then perhaps you started searching online, you started watching videos, you started watching videos like this, and you're here now, and I thank you for that. And you started to learn about words like gaslighting or trauma bonds or emotional abuse, financial abuse, narcissistic behavior, love bombing, and you started to recognize those patterns in your relationship. And then eventually you stopped asking yourself, what I am living now, is this normal and healthy? And you've started to think, I don't want to live like this anymore. And that is movement. Even if nobody else can see it just yet. And if you're just sitting there and thinking to yourself, Brandon, I've already left, but I still feel completely trapped by them. I hear you, because physically leaving and emotionally leaving aren't always the same thing. I understand that. You can be living in another house and still wake up every single day thinking about them. You still grab your phone and check. You replay arguments over and over in your head, still wonder whether you were the problem all along. And I'm going to tell you, you weren't, because you're watching this. You might still miss them. You probably feel angry or want to apologize to them for some reason. Still want them to finally understand what it is that they did to you. Sometimes leaving the relationship is only the beginning of recovering from it. And I've heard that time and time again. And that's why I talk so much about healing rather than just leaving. I don't want your victory simply to be that you got away from somebody. I want your victory to be that eventually they stop occupying so much space inside your head. That you start to fully actually trust yourself again. That peace stops you feeling uncomfortable and unnatural. That you stop explaining yourself constantly in every situation. And that you can say no without spending the next 6 hours feeling guilty for doing so. And you can meet kindness without immediately looking for the hidden motive behind it, because you deserve it. That you can look in the mirror and recognize yourself again and be proud, because that's the part that people just don't talk about enough. And that's getting your life back. Isn't just about removing somebody from it. It's about putting you back into it. And if you're not, if you're nowhere near that point, that's okay. Maybe today your step was simply watching this video. And whether you admit it or think it, you can think, that is me. That is still a step. That is your step today. And before you go, I want to give you just a couple of questions. And you don't need to answer them to me if you don't want. You don't need to put them in the comments. I would love it if you did, and I will go and read them. You can write them down privately if you want, or you can put them in notes on your phone. You could even do them in your head. But answer them. And I want you to answer them for one person, that is for yourself. So the first question is, if absolutely nothing about this relationship changed during the next 5 years, would I want to still be living this life? The second question is, am I in love with the relationship I actually have, or the relationship I keep hoping we're eventually going to have? The third question is 5 in total. What part of myself have I lost trying to keep this relationship together? The fourth question, what is genuinely preventing me from changing my situation? And the final question, what is one thing I could do this week that would give me slightly more independence, information, support, or confidence? Okay? Not 10 things, not the whole plan, just one. Because one thing, when one thing's done, it becomes 2. And then 2 things become 3. And eventually, you may look back and realize that your life started changing long before anybody around you even noticed. If this video has helped you and you've felt like I've been talking directly to you, I would love you to join my private community, which is called Survive and Thrive, and it's hosted over on School. It's specifically for people who want to heal and recover from narcissistic abuse. Inside, you'll meet people, and these are people who understand what you're experiencing, because many of them are going through it themselves, or they're rebuilding their life afterwards. We've got loads of tools and resources to help you through your healing journey. It's truly incredible. And you'll also, that is a place you'll have direct access to chat with me on a daily basis. You can just send me a message and I will be replying to you. I want to create somewhere that doesn't just tell you what narcissistic abuse is, because you probably already know. I want it to be somewhere you can actually feel supported while you work out what comes next for you in your life. So I'll leave the link in the description below. I really hope that you join us there. And if you do, if you join, send me a message. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself once you're inside, because I'd love to hear your story and welcome you to the community personally. But whether you join us or not, I want you to leave this video remembering one thing. You don't have to figure out your entire life plan today. Okay? You don't need to have every answer, and you don't need to know exactly how this story and this chapter of your life ends. For now, perhaps you just need to stop asking yourself the question that we spoke about, which is, why can't I leave? And start asking, what do I need to begin creating choices? Because the moment you start creating those choices for yourself, you start getting some of your power back. Now, I know this was a bit of a longer video today, so I want to thank you for spending this time with me. Okay? And until next time, take care.